We reflect the world. I've often thought that our Toronto Tourism Board could have a slogan. You want to see the world? Visit Toronto. Norm Kelly, Councillor, Scarborough-Agincourt, Ward 40, and I have the privilege and the pleasure of governing the fourth largest city in North America.
This is where I'm from, so it gives me a knowledge, the culture that I'm part of. I'm proud to be part of what's happening in the city.
For a long time, Toronto was always looked at secondary as far as, when it comes to the larger cities in the world. And I think, King of the Dot and the battle rap movement, it helped push worldwide what's happening in this city, and a lot of people getting to pay attention. And we became almost like a center hub for battle rap and hip hop in general.
Canada has no kind of boundaries for the States. It's from Toronto, oh, you're from Canada. Toronto is Canada to them.
I think that Toronto is where New York was in 1986 or 87, believe it or not. I think we're about 10 years behind.
Well, I think the stigma around a player from Canada, a player from Toronto has changed over the years, where they weren't put on the exact same stage as an American basketball player to compete against. They've been able to eliminate all of those questions or stigmas.
When we first moved here, Toronto was really not a very vibrant restaurant city. There wasn't a culture of people who dined out.
A lot of people glorify the city as the city and the six and this and that. I love the city, it's a great city, but there's zero support here.
The biggest obstacle is that we're in Canada. I mean, Toronto's the biggest city for business in Canada for music, and it's still not enough.
I feel like the generation, never mind the artists, but I think a lot of people sort of just had that mentality, well, if I don't see it on an American thing, or there's not that cosign's not there, I don't buy it.
People would always ask where you're from, and we weren't too excited or proud to be like, well, I'm from Toronto. It wasn't like the thing you wanted to say as to, if somebody's from New York, they'd be like, yo, I'm from New York, or I'm from LA.
The one thing about Toronto is multicultural. We have a great city. We have everything that you need in Toronto.
Because when you look at it, there's not really a scene here in Canada as compared to a scene in America.
He's the first Metro chairman, and he's the guy that made all the big decisions. And that's why the Gardner is named after him, because he said, I want a highway there. And he's the guy that said, I want a DVP, and I want a 427. His nickname was Big Daddy.
I feel like my generation was a generation that first even began to say, now this is where we're from. Mm-hmm. But right there was still that line in my generation where I remember a guy made an album, and they would talk about, I met her on the train from White Plains. All these, I can think of two Toronto groups. One has a big hit. I was going for White Plains, train. You will never find another love to make you come around this time. You'll never find another love like.
I was at 233rd and White Plains. Me and my boy, we was riding the train. I saw you.
Yeah, White Plains. Yeah. What are you talking about, White Plains? You're from here. So you had that generation that was doing that. It was like my generation where you'd have two groups, and then you'd have the other ones, Ghetto Concepts, talking, they had patois, and you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
What's the name of the runaway train that ransacks and mangled tracks when I was steaming out your mind frame?
This is where we're from, this is how we talk, this is my neighborhood. That was the beginning of we're from Toronto. Trying not to bring it up. There was that. There was the guys who just didn't say nothing about it. The people who outright lied. And then, my generation always said, no, this is where we're from, and proudly so. So when I went to America, I was proudly from Toronto. That's where I'm from. You know what I'm saying? You hit them with a talk, you hit them with, you know what I mean?
One of the main things is the Canadian public, the Canadian hip-hop scene itself does not support its own.
So maybe that's what I find the city has to kind of get out of, is the stigma of they don't wanna support it because they don't know what it is or they're not familiar with it, rather than getting out there and getting familiar with it or taking the risk to understand what's going on.
And that's a huge problem in this industry, in this country.
It's kind of the city that it is. I would say the biggest hate is in Toronto. The most hate is in Toronto, out of any city that I've been to personally.
I mean, you don't hear it from anyone else in the world, really, but you do hear it from other Canadians.
People just don't like Toronto.
Everybody hates Toronto.
Everyone's mean there, and no one says hi to you on the street.
They're assholes.
Toronto's a buzzkill.
Everybody hates Toronto.
I've had more recognition, I've had more respect, and I've had more positive feedback from every other country, with the exception of Toronto, every other city with the exception of Toronto.
I don't listen to Canadian rap music that much.
It's okay, right? But it's not as good as the American hip hop.
I remember maybe 10 years ago, Tony Sal, who manages The Weeknd, and he invited me out to go clubbing with them, and it was an amazing change for me. When I went clubbing, everybody was white. There was nothing like it is in Toronto now. Within a circle of 15 feet, I think every continent was represented. There were Asian people, there were white people, there were Persian people, there were black people. Everybody was there. They were bringing influences from their countries to the clubs, sharing them with everybody, and then all those people would leave and bring those influences home.
I feel like, growing up, the Toronto scene was very diverse. You had people from all over the city, the West End, the East End. They had their own different styles, and that was kind of what was coming out of the city. Guys like Cardinal, Chaos, just different rappers I grew up off on,
I mean, look, I remember when I was a kid when Maestro, Fresh West came out.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal, that someone was rapping and making good music and on the radio and on TV, and he was to us a star, you know what I'm saying? There's just some things that felt like it could be done, and here's this guy actually doing it. Then Dream Warriors came around. Then you had Socrates, when Socrates was the big underground buzz. And the city was still a bunch of haters back then, but every now and then someone would kind of get above the hate, and everyone would have to at least even grudgingly acknowledge. And remember the Rascals. The Rascals, then we had a West Coast all of a sudden. So now we have the West Coast, and these guys made good music, and Northern Touch happened. And I was like, oh wow, look at this. Choclair came out, Cardinal.
I mean, Cardinal for sure is, in my opinion, is someone who I hold in a high regard as he's that guy for sure that definitely did not have the internet, you know what I mean, but was still able to sort of, break records in his own way, you know what I mean, at least coming from here, no doubt about it.
Cardinal was doing music that, south of the border people were respecting. I'd be places and, Missy would bring him up, or Fox, people would bring him up and comment, oh, this guy from Toronto, that Cardinal guy. One of the first guys that I think who was getting buzz, his videos on BET, and people were like, oh, there's something going on in Toronto, you know what I mean?
And when I first started my career in the music industry, I started out on the street team. Back then, we'd be walking in vinyl to the DJs, into, the key DJs at least, you know what I mean? Hoping that they'll play the records. Now it's like, press a button, send it over to them and hope that they're even going to open your email, because it's kind of a little bit crazy.
When people would go and look for artists in the 90s, they'd go to places in Toronto like the Horseshoe, like X-Rays, like the Cameron House, like Sneaky D's. That's not where you find music anymore. People are emailing beats to people. I mean, you don't take the music and play them in public anymore. You put them up on SoundCloud. It's a very, very different environment now.
Just the rules in general have, I mean, whether you even call them rules anymore now, because the reality is it's almost like there are no rules, you know what I mean?